it. Ready to hit?
Yep.
What are you going to do, forehand?
Sure.
All right, go for it.
Ready?
Yep. Hey guys, I get a lot of questions from tennis parents asking me for advice on how to coach their kids in tennis. And I can answer this question with some credibility because I've been teaching juniors for the vast majority of my teaching career. Only recently have I focused more on the recreational adult level. Also, I have a daughter who plays tennis, who is or was a tournament player, and I'll get into that later in the video, so I can give you some good advice on how to coach your kids. I have a lot of international viewers, so the advice in this video is going to be just general advice for tennis parents. However, there's going to be some advice that's specific for the United States, and I'm going to point that out in the video. So let's start off with the 6 major problem areas that I've been able to observe when it comes to tennis parents guiding their kids through a junior career. The first problem with junior tennis training is quantity over quality when it comes to tennis training. Coaches and parents often believe that the magic formula to develop a successful player is just to play 4, 5, or 6 hours a day, and then somehow magically it's going to turn into an unbelievable player. However, what I've been able to observe in Southeast Florida, this is where I've been living for the last 15 years, which happens to be the mecca of junior tennis, is that players often practice 4, 5, 6 hours a day, but the quality of the training is very poor. And the favorite words that kids have is water. Now this might be due to the reason that it's very hot in Florida, and it might not even be possible to train very hard for that long of a period of time. So what ends up happening is that kids take a lot of breaks. What I've been seeing is kids will hit for 10 minutes and then they'll take a break. They'll say water. Then the break usually lasts 5 minutes or sometimes 10 minutes. Then they go out, hit another 10 minutes, and then another 10-minute break. So this goes on all day. And this is just a very counterproductive way to train for tennis. What you have to do is the exact opposite. You don't want to take that many breaks. You have to monitor your kids or monitor the coaches. What I would usually allow my players to do is take 1 or 2 breaks per hour. Yes, this might seem a little bit harsh, but when you play constantly, you get a lot more tennis in at a shorter amount of time, and then you have time for other things throughout the day. And another thing that I've been able to observe is that kids often lack intensity when they're training. They're often standing around and not moving. They're doing forehands cross court or backhands cross court, and they're standing in one place. Now once you get to a tournament, you'll realize that tennis is not played that way. You're going to be moved all over the court. So in addition to training more efficiently, training a shorter amount of time with less breaks, you also have to possess the highest amount of intensity possible in a short amount of time. And yes, this is hard. Kids are going to get exhausted. They're going to be sweating. They're going to be panting. But this is how you build up stamina. And this is something that's going to be happening in matches as well, because the matches are going to be played in hot weather if you happen to live in Florida. And so you got to train for that. You have to build your stamina so you can last and maybe play 2 or 3 matches in one day. The second problem is homeschooling, and this is a specific problem in the United States. And what happened with my own daughter was that I was of the belief, like many other parents, that if you don't homeschool your kid, you have no chance against the other kids who are homeschooled simply because they have a lot more time to practice. And if my kid went to school, she somehow would be at a disadvantage. But what I have to tell you is that it's the exact opposite. This was the absolute worst decision I've ever made when it came to my daughter's training. And see, what happens when kids are homeschooled is that the sense of urgency is missing in the tennis practice. And this is connected to the first problem that I told you about, where the quality of the practice is not good enough. And this was what was happening to my daughter. Because she had all day to play tennis, there was less intensity, there was less urgency to play compared to going to school, doing your schoolwork, and then yes, they do get home quite late. In the United States, she would get home at 3:30, but it doesn't matter. You can get a fantastic tennis workout in an hour or an hour and a half. It's absolutely unnecessary to spend all day playing tennis when you can do all that you need to do in an hour to an hour and a half. And when the kid goes to school and there's only a small time slot allotted to the tennis practice, there's more of a likelihood that there's going to be more of a sense of urgency. The intensity is going to be higher. And because, let's face it, you don't have all day to play tennis. You only have that 1 hour or 2 hours. So if you don't do a good job there, your entire day of tennis practice is wasted. So does homeschooling ever make sense? Yes, it does. So when you have an elite junior player, someone who is capable of playing junior Grand Slams, or someone who's capable of being competitive at junior ITF tournaments, it makes perfect sense to take that kid out of school so that the kid can travel and play these tournaments that are much needed to advance to the next levels in tennis. However, what I've been able to observe in Florida is kids that are not at that level, they play tournaments in Florida, which are on the weekends, and yet they're homeschooled with a private coach. This, to me, makes absolutely no sense. And you can believe me, because I was under the same impression as everyone else that this is something that was needed, that you needed to play this many hours in a day, and going to school was simply not an option, even at that low level which my daughter was competing in. But after observing this for 3 years, I am 100% sure that she would have advanced just as well if she would have gone to school, and maybe even better. Another problem that tennis parents experience is starting their kids too early. So I get a lot of parents who bring me their kids who are 3 years old, 4 years old, and 5 years old, and I tell everybody the same thing. I have to see how your kid behaves on the court, and then I'll tell you if that kid is ready or not. So most 3 to 5 year olds simply don't have the attention span to be able to play tennis. So how do you check for this attention span? Well, it's very simple to do. You observe the kid as they're playing, and if that kid is hitting 5 balls and then all of a sudden the attention span is gone, they start turning their head, they start looking at other things, they start kicking the ball with their feet, and they're not ready for tennis yet. When the kid starts having the attention span where they can concentrate for 30 minutes to an hour, then they're ready to play tennis. It is absolutely a complete waste of time if you're trying to train a kid who doesn't have that attention span, who is not observing what the parent or the coach is telling them. It is simply a waste of time. So what I recommend is simply to check every now and then if the kid is ready. So if you bring the kid out at 3 years old, and after every 5 balls they start goofing off, it's not time yet. And you check again in a few months, and you check again, and there's going to be one day when they're ready, and you'll notice that all of a sudden they'll have more focus, they'll start hitting balls, they'll start liking the idea of hitting balls, and the focus will be there, and it's then when that kid can start training. And parents often ask me, what is the perfect age to start tennis? And there is no answer. I have had some kids who were able to play tennis at 3 years old, and I have had some kids who weren't able to do it at 5 or 6 years old. See, my daughter, I started her out at 3. I was trying, and it wasn't really going anywhere. And then I realized it was a waste of time. Then I tried again when she was 4. It was still too early, but then at 5 years old, she actually started liking it, and we could start training. So every kid is going to be a little different, but if I would say on average, the best time to start would be around 5 or 6 years old. Another problem that tennis parents face is when they have their kid play up, whether it be playing up in the level of the tournament or playing up in the age group. And this is a huge mistake. What you have to do is not play up unless your kid is dominating their level or dominating their age group. And this is actually a very serious problem for those kids who do play up, because they don't get to train the mental part of tennis. See, what happens to a kid when they play up, they play with absolutely no pressure, and even a loss can be sometimes considered a good result. And see, even the kids themselves usually like to play up, because nobody likes playing with pressure. It's a very uncomfortable feeling. So the kid knows when they play up in an age group or in a level, that when they lose, it's not going to hurt their status as a tennis player, and it's not going to feel as bad as, for example, playing in their own age group against a kid who is similar to them, or maybe even a little bit worse. So these are high pressure matches. The kid doesn't want to play, and this is exactly what the kid needs to be exposed to in order to build up their mental game. Now, the next problem is a big one in Southeast Florida, and parents always complain to me about this specific thing. And it is the fact that parents have to rely on coaches or academies to get match play. I couldn't tell you how often parents have told me that they're happy with their kids training, but they just cannot get any matches. And this is something that is incomprehensible to me, because when I grew up, I played tons of matches. I was lucky enough to have a lot of good juniors in my club in Germany where I grew up, and we would simply call each other. We didn't even use the coaches or the parents. We were all buddies. We would call each other up and we would play tennis every day. Maybe we had lessons with the coach twice a week, but the rest of the week we played tennis by ourselves with no supervision, and would simply play sets and matches. And for whatever the reason may be, in South Florida it seems to be an impossibility that the parents or the kids themselves can organize match play in the afternoons where every kid is available, and they have to rely on coaches and academies, and then naturally they complain about it because maybe there's not enough good players to play against at the academy, or maybe it's the other way around where the players are too strong and their kid is getting destroyed. So my recommendation is that you have to organize with the other parents, and you have to try to find kids who are of a similar level and just simply arrange court time and then play a few sets. It is as simple as that. Now, playing matches for your kid is really important, and later I'll get into what my recommendations are for your kids training. So even if you only had one other kid that your kid is going to face every day in the afternoons, I don't really see a problem with that. Optimally, you want to have a little bit of variety, but even if it's just one other kid, it's still good enough for match play. And last but not least, maybe the biggest problem that tennis parents experience is the following question. Does your kid like tennis, or do you like the idea of your kid playing tennis? See, I had to ask myself this question, and it turned out that I actually liked the idea of my daughter playing tennis more than she liked playing tennis herself. And when that's the case, there's really nothing you can do. If your kid doesn't like playing tennis, there's no way you can force them to love it. What's going to happen is that you might be able to push them into playing tennis, but you're just going to delay the day that they're going to finally quit. If they don't like tennis, when they're out of the house, they're going to stop playing. So you have to ask yourself the hard question. Does your kid like playing tennis? And if they do, then of course you make everything possible for them to become as good of a player as they can be. And here's my general tips for tennis parents. You don't need to play that many hours in a day. You don't need to homeschool your kid. You'll be very surprised how many elite level tennis players went to normal school. They weren't homeschooled, and they only played sometimes 2 to 3 times a week, and they still turn into elite tennis players. It's not the quantity, it's the quality of the training that matters. Also, do not have your kid play up in the age group or play up in their level until they're dominating their age groups or their level of play. And what kind of tennis training your kid is going to be doing doesn't really matter as long as your kid is playing tennis. And why am I saying this? Because there's so many examples of elite level tennis players who had different ways of training. So some played a ton of tournaments and did well. Others played almost no tournaments and did well. There's some who had private coaches, did well, and there's some who grew up more in a group environment and they did well. You have to figure out what suits your kids best. Some kids might thrive if they are with a private coach. Other kids might thrive more in a group environment. Also, some kids like the idea of playing a lot of tournaments, but other kids don't. So you have to kind of feel out what works best for your kid. But generally speaking, a good mixture of having a private coach who is going to teach your kid sound fundamentals, having access to match play, and also playing some tournaments is something that you can't go wrong with. I'm going to close out this video with the most important tip that I can give you, and this is something that I discussed in a previous video where I talked about kids asking me whether it's too late for them to turn pro. So having this idea as a parent or as a kid about turning pro is maybe the biggest reason why kids burn out and stop playing tennis altogether. If you want to know in more detail why this is the case, check out my video titled, "Is it too late for me to turn pro?" So what you have to do as a tennis parent is set the smallest goals possible for your kid. And when your kid achieves these goals, there's going to be a happy feeling for the kid, but for the parents as well. It's going to be overall a very pleasurable experience, and then you can go on to the next goal.